Madhupatarithayate Madhuksharanti Sindhavaham Madhveirna Santoshadhi Madhunaktam Utoshasi Madhumatparthivagumrajam Madhudaurastuna Pitam Madhumanno Banaspatir Madhumagumastu Surjam Madhvirgabo Bhavantunam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the winds blow sweetly. May the rivers flow sweetly. May plants and herbs be sweet to us. May days and nights be sweet to us. May the heaven that protects us be sweet to us. May the sun shine on us sweetly. May the dust of the earth be sweet to us. May the cows yield sweet milk to us. Let all beings be happy. Let all beings be peaceful. Let all beings be blissful. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto all. Friends, this morning we have a special guest speaker, John Manje. He is from California. He will present Huston and Smith and Vedanta.
Last year marked the 70th anniversary of Huston Smith's 1947 hitchhiking trip from Denver, where he was teaching at the time, to Trabuco College, as it was called then, to meet Gerald Heard. It was Huston's first face-to-face meeting with a Vedantist, which shortly led to Aldous Huxley and Swami Satprakashananda in St. Louis. Association with these three influential Vedantists largely shaped the direction and personal life and career of Huston. As much as possible, I'm going to let Huston speak for himself, including this introduction, for reasons you'll understand soon.
I was asked in the moments before we came to order, how would you like to be introduced? And I said, well, folks, here's Huston Smith, and let it go. I said, anything more you say takes time away from me. Well, that didn't go very well. So I had a backup. I said, okay, here's my alternative. Let me introduce myself. And that flew. And so one of the reasons I like to introduce myself is that introductions always have so much hype in them. I mean, that's the nature of the game. Who's going to ever say, well, ladies and gentlemen, here is Professor Smith. He's not much, but he was the best our honorarium could afford. You know, that doesn't go. And so those superlatives really work against me. One of the things I've been trying to do recently is to reduce the size of my ego. And lavish introductions just work against that. I'm Huston Smith. I was born in traditional China of Methodist missionary parent. And from as far back as I can remember, my guiding star, what I wanted to do most in my life, was to know the truth with a capital T, meaning by that the big picture, the widest angle lens we could get on the nature of ultimate reality.
You're going to see a much more elaborate introduction, sometimes heaped with great praise, and we'll also see a lot more detail about Huston's life. He was immersed in his personal spiritual practices. When not teaching about the world's religion, he was learning about them, from deep associations with masters in the various religions of the world. He also believed, wrote, and taught about the significance of the perennial philosophy, which he felt was the foundational core of all religions, which is defined as the spiritual truth that are revealed in all religions throughout history. In the 1940s and 50s, average Americans started to become aware of Eastern religions. Today's subject, Professor Huston Smith, was a highly influential author, lecturer, and TV personality who presented Vedanta, Buddhism, and Islam to the post-war American public. What's not known to most people is that the early and lasting influence on Huston came directly from the Ramakrishna Vedanta movement. We see evidence of that lasting Vedantic influence in today's yoga studios in our language with words like karma, guru, pundit, reincarnation, the individual pursuit of spirituality, meditation, and the acceptance that all religions lead to God, the perennial philosophy. The original sources of that influence in the U.S. is almost forgotten today. Huston's spiritual teacher, Swami Satprakashananda of St. Louis, predicted this when he was asked, "Will Vedanta take root in the West?" The Swami replied, "Yes, but the source will not be known." While the Ramakrishna Vedanta movement can't take all the credit, it's certainly one of the earliest, far-reaching, and most persisting sources. The Transcendentalists and the Theosophists certainly helped prepare the ground for what would come later. The order's work in the West was originally established by the 5 direct disciples of Ramakrishna, who came here to create Vedanta centers and teach the truths they learned from their master, Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda was the first, speaking at the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago. The stated purpose of the Parliament was to showcase the various religions of the world as equals, but only Vedanta has those ideals explicitly held in its philosophy and scripture. While in the U.S., Vivekananda established the New York and San Francisco centers. He was followed by 4 other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, Swamis Sardananda, Turiyananda, Trigunatitananda, and Abhedananda. As membership in the Vedanta societies grew, the next generation of Swamis established more centers around the country. 3 Swamis in particular attracted the attention of some of the leading Western authors of the time. Swami Prabhavananda, a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, Swami Satprakashananda, also a disciple of Brahmananda, and Swami Nikhilananda, who was a disciple of Holy Mother Sri Sarda Devi. The authors who studied under these Swamis contributed greatly to the introduction of Vedanta philosophy to the broader American public. In Hollywood, under Swami Prabhavananda, Aldous Huxley and Christopher Isherwood introduced Vedanta to their readers, most notably Huxley's Perennial Philosophy and Isherwood's collaboration with Swami Prabhavananda on translations of Vedantic scripture. While a student of Nikhilananda in New York, J.D. Salinger weaved quotes from Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda into his later works, in particular the Glass family stories. Mythologist Joseph Campbell greatly helped with editing the Nikhilananda translation of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and for a time was president of the New York Center. But today I'm going to focus on Huston Smith, a student of Swami Satprakashananda. Millions of Americans came to know about Smith through the work of journalist and author Bill Moyers.
Hello, I'm Bill Moyers. When it comes to the comparative study of religion, Huston Smith literally wrote the book. The World's Religions, or The Religion of Man as it was once titled, has been a perennial bestseller for decades and a staple of introduction to religion courses. I remember reading it when I was a young seminarian almost 50 years ago. Few books have so informed my life in government, publishing, and journalism. Huston Smith opened my mind to the power of religion in cultures the world over and their impact on human events. Widely acclaimed and popular, Huston Smith is, in my opinion, the most influential religious scholar of the 20th century.
Huston would have blushed and waved off being called the most influential religious scholar of the 20th century, but it's not hype. He made interreligious studies accessible with humor, insight, and the depth of knowledge that came from decades of studying and practicing spirituality under the masters of each of the religions of the world. Huston's books have sold millions of copies over the last 6 decades, many of which became required textbooks at leading universities. His TV shows and interviews have been seen by millions more. Yet few of his fans know that he is a self-proclaimed Vedantist, specifically a Christian Vedantist. Let's get into his biography and see how Huston's view of God and religion have evolved. Huston Smith was born in 1919 in rural China to missionary parents. His family was very well respected and lived their Christian religious beliefs, helping the poor and teaching by example. In all his explorations of the world's religions, Huston never had cause to give up his bedrock Christian roots.
When I came to this country, at first I thought I was going right back as a missionary.
How old were you then?
I was 17, and my only American male role model was my father. And so I grew up assuming that missionaries were what American boys grew up to be. But I was totally unprepared for the dynamism of the West. Never mind that it was Central Methodist College, enrollment 600, in Fayette, Missouri, population 3,000. Compared with Podunk, China, it was the big time and the bright lights, and by 2 weeks, China had faded into a happy memory. I wasn't going to squander my life in the backwaters of rural China. But I just moved over across the street, so to speak, and I'd be a minister. Then something happened in my junior year, and I ended trying to get out of as many organizations as I could in order to focus on my studies.
Why? What happened?
Well, what happened was there was a little discussion group that the philosophy professor organized, and once a month, he would have us over and we would discuss a philosophical issue. I suppose it must have been mounting in me all evening. As we walked back to our dormitory, a little cluster of us, 4 or 5, stood in the dorm hall until after midnight, just hammer and tong, talking about these as unlikely a group of peripatetics as you would find anywhere. But it kept on going as I went alone to my room until, I don't know when, maybe around 1 or 2 o'clock, it just like my mind detonated, demolishing mental stockades. And it was almost like a mystical experience. Like ideas were almost visible. The Platonic form were out there. You could almost touch it. And just receding from me endlessly. I wonder if I slept at all that night. But that was a changing point. And after that, never mind the organization, to focus on this. And that has stayed in play. That has been, the life-giving lure.
Sometime during his undergraduate studies, Huston became attracted to the religious philosophy of Henry Nelson Wyman, whose personal beliefs are described as theocentric naturalism. God is behind all existence, but only natural laws and physical forces operate in the universe, as opposed to actions caused by a supernatural being. After World War II, science, the scientific method, and materialism were becoming the dominant philosophy of our country. Houston attended graduate school at the University of Chicago under the direction of noted religious thinker Henry Nelson Wyman, who was instrumental in shaping thinking about religious naturalism. He wrote, "It's impossible to gain knowledge of the total cosmos or to have any understanding of the infinity transcending the cosmos. Consequently, beliefs about these matters are illusions, cherished for their utility in producing desired states of mind." During this time in Chicago, Houston met Wyman's daughter, Eleanor, now Kendra. They were married in 1943. Karen, the first of 3 daughters, was born in 1944, followed by Gail in 1947 and Kim in 1949. While doing research for his doctoral thesis, Houston was looking for books on the subject of pain and happened to run across Gerald Heard's book, Pain, Sex, and Time. Being the most interesting title of the books in hand, Houston read the whole night through. Heard opened Houston's mind to the idea of the transcendental. Houston found something so profound in Heard's writing that he made a vow not to read anything else by him until he finished his PhD. But once his union card was in hand, he would read everything by him. Gerald Heard is almost forgotten now, but in the 1940s and 50s, he was a much sought-after lecturer and drew large crowds wherever he spoke, including the Hollywood Temple. Heard's mystic worldview took Houston away from scientific naturalism and into the world of the transcendental. In 1944, after getting his PhD, Houston accepted a teaching position in Denver at the University of Colorado. In 1947, Houston accepted a teaching position at Washington University in St. Louis. But before moving further east, Houston decided to get in touch with Gerald Heard. Through Heard's publisher, he got an address at Trabuco Canyon in Southern California. Gerald Heard and Aldous Huxley had traveled from England before the war to Hollywood and studied under Swami Satprakashananda, the founder of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. They were soon joined by Christopher Isherwood. Gerald wanted to experiment with monastic living and raise funds to build Trabuco College. Huxley spent a good deal of time there as well, including a 6-week stretch while working on the perennial philosophy. Later, Heard would donate the grounds and building to the Vedanta Society. Houston hitchhiked to Trabuco and hit it off with Heard, who asked him if he would care to meet Aldous Huxley. Houston was eager to do so. Before leaving Southern California, Houston met with Maria and Aldous Huxley at their desert retreat. Later, Houston would describe the simple pleasures of sweeping the floors with Maria and walking into the desert with Aldous, discussing the desert fathers and the nature of reality. It was suggested by Heard that once Houston settled in St. Louis, he should look up Swami Satprakashananda. Swami Satprakashananda was the go-to scholar for Prabhavananda and Nikhilananda to check the validity of their translations. After Houston and his family arrived in St. Louis, he looked up the address and took a bus to the apartment building, which then housed the center. Houston recognized the format of Swami's Katha Upanishad class. It was the same format as a traditional Bible study class. A verse was read, and then the Swami would explain the substance of the passage. Houston was hooked. At first, Houston found it a little exotic, a Swami in orange robes and Hindu trappings. But on his way out, he buys a copy of the Upanishads, and for the second time of his life, stayed up all night reading. What struck him was that so much truth was packed into so few words. At Washington University, the dean has decided that the school should broaden its outlook to include courses that would give students a perspective on the world. Since World War II, a broader worldview would perhaps help the cause of world peace. Since Houston is the new man in the philosophy department, he is given the assignment. This is the genesis of Houston's Religion of Man, later to be retitled The World's Religions. Much of the material for the chapter on Hinduism came from the 10-year association between Houston and Swami Satprakashananda. Houston had said of him that he had met scholars and he had met holy men, but never before had he met both in the same person.
he found himself once again on the verge of two traditions, Christianity and Hinduism, as he submitted to weekly tutorials with the renowned scholar Swami Satprakashananda.
There was a moment in St. Louis a few years where I had a dual role. I was listed as associate minister at the Methodist Church nearby and was president of the Vedanta Society of St. Louis, which was teaching me metaphysical profundities that my church certainly was not preaching. That this all came to a head on Christmas Eve, because there would be a 4 o'clock Christmas service at the church, which would be a family affair in the afternoon so the children could come. And that was wonderful. Christmas music, silent night, all of that, all of the magic of Christmas and being together with our children was just glorious. But then we would go home, have a supper, put the children to bed early for their early rising, and then I would slip off to the Vedanta Society, where every Christmas Eve, Swami Satprakashananda, he never varied his title, was Jesus Christ, the light of the world. And even though in the Methodist Church there was all the happiness of the family togetherness, when it came to spiritual depth, what he said, the Swami said about the incarnation, fed my soul more than any Christmas sermon in the Methodist Church. Now you see, I'm a living witness to the fact that I have drawn spiritual succor from an alien tradition, which, however, was true to the metaphysical teachings of original Christianity more than my church, which had been diluted by modernism.
What's not well known, even to friends of Huston and Kendra, was that they were very involved in the St. Louis civil rights movement of the 1950s. Not just supporters, but active in marches, demonstrations, and lunch counter sit-ins. Huston and Kendra were among the founding members of the St. Louis chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, which carried out sustained nonviolent campaigns from 1947 to 1957, which were among the earliest in the nation to end racial segregation in public accommodations. Kendra participated in lunch counter sit-ins, and Huston brought Martin Luther King to speak at the still segregated Washington University and worked within the administration to fully desegregate.
Huston had tremendous contribution to the Vedanta Society of St. Louis. He was the president of our society. He brought his students from the Washington University to Swami Satprakashananda and introduced them with the Swami. Then in 1951, Swami Satprakashananda wanted to buy a house. And there was a little racial prejudice in that area at that time. The owner of the house did not want to sell the house to Swami. So the present house was bought in Huston and his wife Kendra's name. Then Huston transferred that property to the Vedanta Society.
In the early days of television, there was a frantic search for original content to broadcast. In the mid-1950s, the local affiliate of National Education Television, NET, the precursor to PBS, in St. Louis, found out that one of the most popular lectures at the local university was Huston Smith's Religion of Man courses. A producer was assigned to help turn Huston's lectures into a nationally broadcast series, which gave many Americans their first introduction to Eastern religion and Islam.
We're going to talk tonight about the yogas. Now, this is a very strange word to us. In fact, I find myself smiling in a Western context whenever I turn to this word, because, well, we associate it with the bizarre, the fantastic, the occult, maybe even the fraudulent a little bit, the fakers. This is where we come to the famous yoga position, and I want to just show you what this is. There's always a little humor involved in this because it's so strange to us. But nevertheless, I think we ought to know what this is. They say the most effective position which will still the mind is the so-called yoga, the lotus posture. It doesn't go very well with shoes, which is why I've taken mine off. Actually, it doesn't go very well with trousers either, but we'll forget about that tonight. You put one foot up here in the lap, then all you have to do is to bring the other foot around like that. The spine must be completely straight. Now they say when you get used to this, the point is that this will put your mind at rest and keep out the bodily distractions better.
The lecture series became the book, which is first published in 1958 and has since sold millions of copies.
Huston's TV series and books have introduced Vedanta to millions of Americans, including householders, monks, and nuns of the Ramakrishna order.
There's two ways of meeting Huston. There's one way through his books, and there's the other way of meeting Huston, which is through meeting Huston and actually being with Huston and experiencing the joy of being with Huston. I'd already met Huston through the books before I met the human being Huston. And I was very impressed by the books. I think a lot of us were deeply moved by that Religions of Man, what later became the world's religions. First of all, he can write. Second of all, there was something coming from the inside which was very different from other books that I'd read on religious studies. What particularly impressed me was meeting him and seeing that tie-in. Because you had a man who was a person who was obviously a practitioner, who was coming from his experience as a scholar from the inside out, not from the outside in. So you had the feeling of total, even more than sympathy. It was a deep empathy which carried through. And it makes a huge difference when you read something to have that sense of it being an experiential.
With the growing national reputation Huston earned with the publication of his book and broadcast of the TV series, he was approached by other universities, including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which wanted to add philosophy to their math and engineering focus.
In 1958, Huston accepted a position at MIT and moved his family to Boston. In 1960, Huston is given a budget to bring a guest lecturer for a semester and calls on his friend Aldous Huxley. This creates a sensation. The lecture series is wildly successful, creating traffic problems throughout the Boston area and an overflow packed hall.
Huxley suggests that Huston should contact Harvard professors Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who are doing research on the effects of psychedelic drugs on human consciousness, which might hold religious significance.
The point that interests me is that whereas the ordinary, everyday experience is, of course, absolutely essential most of the time, it's not the only possible experience. There are also other types of consciousness, the artist type, the mystics type, and so on, which have empirically an enormous value and may help people to live less self-centered and more charitable lives and more understanding lives.
In 1962, Smith participated in what would later be called the Good Friday experiments, meant to induce mystical experiences through religious settings while under the influence of LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin. At the time, these drugs were not only legal, but considered quite legitimate research subject.
There have been many books written about those early psychedelic experiments. One recent book, The Harvard Psychedelic Club, portrays Huston as the adult in the room, who cautiously described the potential benefits of the drugs, as well as the pitfalls and abuses that may follow. These faces may be more familiar to you. When talking about psychedelics and their connection to religious experiences, Huston cautions with a Chinese proverb, "Know 10 things, tell 9." Feeling that it's nearly impossible to speak on the subject without being misunderstood. I think Huston would say, drugs may be a useful signpost on the spiritual path, but the drug experience is not the destination or the means to get there. He makes the point that it's not altered states we seek, but altered traits, which fits with what Swami Satprakashananda said about the difference between the psychedelic drug experience and true spiritual experience. The religious experience changes your character, drugs do not. Huston did a series of films with the Hartley Film Foundation on Tibet, Sufi Islam, and India. Huston loved to travel and take his students around the world to see firsthand the religions they studied set in their country of origin. Tibet became a favorite and was to become an important part of Huston's career and personal life. He helped efforts to support the exiled Tibetan Buddhist culture, which had to flee their homeland after the invasion of Tibet by China.
In addition to seeing the truth, we can feel it physically with our bodies. So the Tibetans enacted the truth through gestures. Feel the unity of life, these hands are saying. Of course there is left and right, male and female, light and shadow, joy and grief. But need they quarrel? They belong together. Finally, truth can be heard. Propositionally, of course, in words, but at a deeper level in music. So the Tibetans chanted, most of the time in gravelly, monotonous monotone, but punctuated periodically with something extraordinary. They discovered ways, we still don't know how, of shaping their vocal cavities to resonate overtones to the point where these became audible as distinct tones in their own right. So each Lama, thus trained, could sing chords by himself.
Huston made a recording of the monks and took it back to MIT, where acoustic engineers confirmed that the monks were producing multiphonic chords when chanting. That recording of the monks is still in print, with royalties going to the Kyoto Tantric University. On one of Huston's early trips to Tibet, he met the then young Dalai Lama, who was eager to meet a scientist from MIT. Huston and the Dalai Lama became lifelong friends. Huston helped clear the way at the State Department to allow the Dalai Lama to come to the United States for the first time. Huston's quest to find examples of the perennial philosophy, the truth with a capital T, in each of the world religions, and focused on each religion's mystical traditions that can be found in Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Sufis of the Islamic faith.
The soul of Islam is Sufism. It arose as a reaction against the worldliness that came over Islam with its rise to power. Ascetics, some living in caves, donned coarse woolen shirts from which the word Sufi derives, to protest the silks and satins of sultans and caliphs. They wanted to purify and spiritualize Islam from within, give it a deeper mystical tone, infuse into it a spirit of liberty and love. Externals must yield to internals, matter to meaning, outward symbol to inner reality. Love the pitcher less, they cried, and the water more.
Of course, the clearest and earliest example of the perennial philosophy is found in India's Vedic scripture and culture.
Everything about India is different because India seems to include everything. All the main racial types have been caught in her deep net. Blacks in the south shade into wheat-colored Brahmins in the north. while in language there are so many that English must be imported for general use. On the whole, yesterday is more visible than tomorrow, with millions following a way of life that can be traced back 4,000 years. Startling purity contrasts with equally startling license. Naked voluptuaries on temple friezes vie with naked ascetics stretched on beds of nails. The paradoxes extend right up to God. 330 million deities sounds like polytheism gone haywire until we learn that nothing but the one true God even exists.
Because of Huston's popularity with TV audiences, he was asked to host another NET series consisting of interviews with leading authors and intellectuals under the title of The Search for America. Later, a book of the same title was produced with excerpts from the interviews. During Huston's career, he interviewed some of the most well-known and influential religious and intellectual leaders in the U.S. and around the world, including D.T. Suzuki, Krishnamurti, Eleanor Roosevelt, John Kenneth Galbraith, Margaret Mead, Reinhold Niebuhr, and Paul Tillich, to name a few. In 1967, Huston interviewed Krishnamurti, who had hung out socially with Aldous Huxley and Gerald Heard. Krishnamurti was raised by the Theosophists from a young boy and was groomed to be the next avatar or world teacher. But in his 30s, he renounced it all and declared that seekers of truth should not accept any authority. At the time of the break, he said, I'm quoting, "Truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion or any sect." Krishnamurti was adamant about rejecting all spiritual teachers. In contrast, Huston believed that spiritual teachers could greatly help, and in most cases are absolutely necessary. This clip captures how Huston deals with ideas he finds implausible or just wrong. Rather than being confrontational, he gently and characteristically says, "I wonder," and then continues the conversation.
No dualism, you say, no separation. And in your view, is this the case that there is no separation?
Absolutely there is.
Here, do you feel any separation? Is there any separation, you, me?
Physically there is.
Yeah.
You have got a black suit, you're a fairer person than me.
But
and
you
so
don't feel...
if I felt dualistic, I wouldn't even sit down to discuss it. Because then we would be intellectually, we play with each other.
Right. Now, perhaps we're saying the same thing, but it comes out in my mind as a both and. We are both separate and we're united.
So when you love somebody with your heart, not with your mind, do you feel separate?
I do in some, it's both. I feel both separate and together.
Then it's not love.
I wonder, because love, part of the joy of love is the relationship, which involves, in some sense, like Ramakrishna said, I don't want to be sugar, I don't know sugar.
I don't know Ramakrishna. I don't want to know any authority. I don't want to quote any bird.
Don't get hung up on
we are dealing with facts, not what somebody said.
I'll just add that Huston would play the full 1-hour interview for his students to gauge their attitude towards religion. After roughly a decade at Washington University in St. Louis and MIT in Boston, Huston's career took him to Syracuse University in upstate New York.
In 1973, Huston accepted a position at Syracuse University. While there, he came to realize that he had left out Native American religions from his great book.
In my formal education of religion, I say that with a wry smile, was taught that they were primitive, with the pejorative built solidly into that word. And therefore, no reason to pay any attention to them except for historical reason, what the old people felt way back in the childhood of the human race. I would have gone out my life in that mode if I hadn't moved to Syracuse, where providentially I was moving into the shade of the Onondaga Reservation, and that 10 years that I was there absolutely transformed my view of the indigenous religion, and I am so grateful. I will not go to my grave not having entered a final chapter in the second edition of my book.
Huston also became involved with the case to legalize peyote for Native American religious ritual. A decade-long struggle finally succeeded in recognizing the right to practice the religious traditions of the Native Americans.
Bill Moyers is an author and journalist who had done in-depth reporting on current events ranging from politics to religion. In 1988, PBS and Bill Moyers produced a 6-part series on Joseph Campbell titled The Power of Myth. The series was watched by millions. Then in 1996, Moyers and PBS produced a 5-part series on the world religions titled The Wisdom of Faith with Huston Smith.
What do you make of that Hindu proverb, "There are realms of gold hidden in the depths of our hearts"?
In the Upanishads, the philosophical versions and texts of Hinduism, there is a phrase that comes repeatedly like the clang of a gong. It's tat tvam asi, literally, that thou art. And what it means is that which we seek in Brahman, the divine, whatever you call it, is right here within you. You see, they begin by saying you can have what you want, and that sounds very good, but wait till you get to the climax, and that you've already got it.
Huston's personal religious practices evolved over time, starting with Satprakashananda. He added meditation and yoga to his regular Christian practice of reading scripture, singing hymns, and prayer. Huston would retain some of the practices from the various religions he studied throughout his life, without any compromise of his core Christian beliefs and practices. He said that standing on his head was his favorite yoga posture as it raised his metabolism the most. For a time, Huston practiced Salah, the Islamic practice of praying 5 times a day. Huston was a strong and vocal advocate of the perennial philosophy, becoming the most prominent flag bearer for the belief after Aldous Huxley. He saw it as the only plausible explanation that the same core religious truths arose independently in all major cultures of the world throughout history. Huston liked to compare what Christ taught to the 4 yogas of Vedanta. As Swami said, love the Lord with all thy heart, Bhakti Yoga, with all thy soul, Raja Yoga, with all thy mind, Jnana Yoga, with all thy strength, Karma Yoga. Also, Huston compared the great Vedic dictum, I am Brahman, to Christ's teaching, I and the Father am one. After retiring from full-time teaching, Huston didn't drop out of sight. He kept writing and lecturing. At one point in his 80s, he had to promise his wife Kendra to slow down and do, I'll quote, no more than 1 local talk per week, no more than 2 out-of-towners per month, and no more than 2 international trips per year. When we see Huston in the Bill Moyers interviews, we see him at his apex. He was in his mid-70s. Now we meet Huston in his 90s. He suffered progressive hearing loss, osteoporosis, macular degeneration, and slowing memory and organizational skills. In his mid-80s, he opted to get a cochlear implant operation, and he compensated for his memory loss by setting up a successful system of notes and papers to keep himself communicating and working. He said that correspondence that came in went in a pile, and he dealt with them in order. Nobody jumped the line. Huston gave hundreds of interviews in his later years.
I believe that the fundamental faith of all the authentic religions is it all makes sense. There is an analogy used frequently that we're asked to visualize a wonderful tapestry hanging wall, ceiling to floor in a museum. Our problem, the human problem, is we are looking at the tapestry from the wrong side. And you know what that's like. I mean, bits and snippets of yarn and so on cut off. It makes no sense at all. And then the point of religion is to take us by the hand and lead us from looking at the back side to the front, where it's a great work of art.
For one of his last interviews, noted lecturer and gerontologist Dr. Ken Dykewald sought Huston's views on the subject of aging, life, and death. But what made Huston so dear to so many was his sense of humor and lightness. Here, Ken asks what song would best describe his life.
If you were to think of one song that best tells the story of your life, what song would that be?
Let me see. How can I keep from singing? Do you know that song?
I do not.
Well, you can edit it out of the film,
please.
but it's a wonderful song. My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentations. I hear that sure but far off tune that spells a new creation. Midst all the sorrows and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? Well, you asked for it, so you got it.
Throughout Huston's career, he maintained his connection with Vedanta, when possible going back to St. Louis and lecturing at the center, writing forewords and introductions for books written by the Swamis of the order, and continuing as the primary flag bearer of the perennial philosophy. After retiring to Berkeley, Huston made it a point to attend the annual Memorial Day retreat in Olima, just north of San Francisco, hosted by the Vedanta Society of Northern California, where representatives of the world's religions are invited to talk. In the last stage of his life, Huston co-authored 2 books of reminiscences and saw his official biography published by Dana Sawyer, written by Dana Sawyer. But eventually Huston's health gave out as he approached his late 90s. Told that he only had a few months to live, he was enrolled in home hospice care. He reported that he was in no pain and was comfortable. Slowly, Huston's senses fell from him. He was already profoundly deaf even before hospice, and then his eyesight faded, and then at times he seemed to lose all contact with the outside world. Huston's North Campus home in Berkeley was nice but humble. For years, Huston and Kendra sponsored a multi-generational Tibetan refugee family. They lived in a detached converted garage apartment. This family proved to be a great blessing for Huston and Kendra as Huston's health declined. As Huston's physical condition weakened, the Tibetan family moved into the main house to care for him. At that point, there were 3 generations in the family, including a toddler and 2 rescue dogs. The family slept upstairs in what used to be Huston's bedroom and office. Huston slept in the downstairs bedroom, confining himself to the ground level, and Kendra slept in the garage apartment. He was not ready to give up, which made his extended hospice period so intriguing. When people came to visit, Huston knew who they were and would rise to the occasion.
When we visited, he spoke about Swami Satprakashananda and how much Swami had meant to him. Similarly, when Swami Chaitananda visited, he again talked about Satprakashananda. He was in hospice, at times at death's door, for a total of 2 years and 8 months. We can only guess at what was going on inside. His memorial was held at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco on April 1st, 2017.
Welcome to everyone who is gathered to honor the ever-alive spirit of Huston Smith.
So many of us here today found someone we were looking for when we found Huston. Our lives, it seems, had somehow disclosed to us the reality of the sacred, and we wanted to know more. Because we sought knowledge, we were looking for scholars. With a doctorate in philosophy from Chicago at age 25, Huston qualified. Because we were students, we were looking for teachers, and Huston was a gifted one, made sharper still by his early embrace of the rigors of television. Because we were readers, we were looking for writers, and Huston loved to write. He sometimes said his favorite way to pray was with a pencil in his hand. Eventually, there were 14 books and over 100 articles. Because some of us had encountered entheogens, we were delighted to find someone who was soberly sympathetic. In 1964, Huston published Do Drugs Have Religious Import?, the most anthologized piece ever to appear in that journal's history, reprinted in 14 books. Because we had been born into a globalizing world, we were looking for a universalist who found it unthinkable that the infinite could privilege any particular culture or institution. Long before I was a perennialist, Huston once said, I was a universalist. And because we were hungry for authenticity, we were looking for someone who laid himself open to traditional methods of attunement to the ground of being, as Huston did. All this would have been quite enough, but the wonder that was Huston also came wrapped, as George Hart once put it, in an incomparable combination of personal warmth, infectious humor, exceptional clarity, and unobtrusive but palpable spirituality. It is no wonder then that when we did find Huston, whenever and wherever we found him, we leaned toward him like plants toward sunlight.
As the recognized dean of world religious studies, Huston was often invited to be the keynote speaker at interfaith gatherings, as was the case in this one held in 2006 in San Francisco, featuring Huston's old friend, the Dalai Lama. He supported interfaith meetings and felt there was two important principles which had to be upheld and, when required, defended. The first was that all the traditional religions are true and all lead to union with our divine nature. This was first expressed in the Rig Veda. There is one reality, the wise call it by many names. There is one truth, reached by many paths. Huston also insisted that one should choose a path and then stick with it. He argued against what he called cafeteria religion, taking a bit of this and a bit of that, but avoiding what you think might be unpleasant. Huston himself added spice from other religions to his constant and stable diet of Christianity. As Ramakrishna said in the Gospel, you must stick with one path with all your strength. A man can reach the roof of a house by stone stairs or a ladder or a rope, or even by a bamboo pole, but he cannot reach the roof if he sets foot now on one, now on another. He should firmly follow one path. I'll let Huston have the last word.
First of all, I would like to introduce my dear friend, Huston Smith. Professor Huston Smith will say a few words first.
I have a pretty good projection voice. Do I need a microphone? What shall I do? I'm already wired. My other and final comment is someone once asked Mahatma Gandhi, wouldn't it be wonderful if goodness were as contagious as the common cold? And he answered, when will we ever learn that goodness is as contagious as the common cold? So I'm going to leave this day a better person. The goodness of His holiness and all of us who are joined together in the noble task, because I've caught the contagious from you and from all of you.
Because Huston was profoundly deaf, he couldn't hear the thunderous standing ovation he was receiving. Like Beethoven, he had to be turned to face the audience.
Through all the tumult and the strife, those freedom bells come ringing, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing? My life goes on in this song. My life goes on in this song.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you, John, sharing your wonderful presentation to our friends and devotees in St. Louis. While watching, so many memories came to my mind. I still remember. He was talking about Krishnamurti. It was in early 70s from Santa Barbara. I went to Ohio to listen to his lecture. He was pounding, destroy all this guru business. No guru, no human being, nothing. Then when the lecture was over, I went to him, I said, but you were teaching, then why are you teaching? You are a guru. He avoided me, he did not answer my question, he left. I personally very grateful to Huston, because whenever I need any blurb or some kind of quotes and introduction for our publications, he always wrote something. I remember when I was working Vedanta Voice of Freedom, he wrote the preface. Then Vivekananda, East meets West, he wrote the introduction. And all the books I wrote, whenever he was well, he always wrote and introduced our books to the Western audience. I personally very grateful to him. I still remember one day in Kansas City, I was in my room and he was sleeping in the other room, our guest room. Swami, please knock at my door when I go to the shrine. If I fall asleep, please knock at my door. But before I knock, he got up, came to the shrine, we meditated together. Then in the breakfast table, we were talking about Gita. He was assigned to write 5 introductions of the 5 world's classics. Pilgrim's Way, Christianity, Gita, then Rumi's book in Islam, then anyhow, 5, I don't remember all the 5 books. He was assigned, I think Harper or Row or famous company, publisher. He is supposed to write the introduction. So I talked about Gita. Nearly breakfast table, 1 hour gone, we are talking about Gita. What are the characteristics of the Bhagavad Gita? The Swami, forget the lecture, let us talk only about Gita. Then I said, Houston, do you know I have a sentence. Sometimes some people, famous quote. I have a quote, gossip spreads faster than the gospel. Swami, wait, let me write down. Remember what you said. Full of humor, very wise person, very deep, profound, humble, universal. Seldom we find this kind of person in the West or in the world. Ajata Shatru, that person's enemy has not been born. Houston was such a person. A great soul. Though he is not with us physically, but his ideas, his thoughts will continue. And I am very thankful to you, John, to show this wonderful thing to our devotees and friends here. And I think we recorded it, and we shall use it again in the future. A great person, and a great supporter of our society. Even when I went to see him, perhaps he saw his picture. He was in bed, and he was taking a picture. He was smiling, Swami. He was inquiring about Virginia, about how society is going on, even at that time. And I am so grateful to that. He showed that Tibetan family. They lived in the same house. They keep him alive. His body, was lying down for months, years. Room was clean, bed clean. The way those people take care of that, even a person's children will not take care of the way this Tibetan family took care of Houston. Kendra was old. Kendra's wife could not took care of him. Children are out. But he was not neglected. He died very peacefully. Anyhow, we are very grateful to him. Thank you very much, John, to show this multimedia presentation to us. And I think we videotaped it and we shall see again. Thank you very much.